and welcome back to my own narrative series of The Lands of Ordia, Power of Heaven, which is my own, I would say, upcoming fantasy series, as I published the first one a few years ago, and I decided to, just kind of read through it and see how you guys like it. Because I do have the second book written, though it is pretty much in the editing stage. But that'll be for another story because we're right now in the first book. So we just read through chapter 4, and now we'll be going on to chapter 5, just the way it goes. Let me see here. Oh yeah, Unlikely Allies was the last chapter, and basically we got to meet a mysterious figure called Goluuf, who we will see later on in the story. And it's not really spoilers, but we'll see him later. Where Jaerel and Koraven met him in the Chemcore Forest, and now they are stumbling upon Maisin Rokine, their destination. So they finally made it back to the city, because we will be reading now chapter 5, A Breath of Relief. "Jaerel!" shouted Jaerel's mother, Seelnin, across the wide spaces of the guild of Goluuf Wavlin. "You've come back at last!" Even before they had set foot into Maisin Rokine, Jaerel and Koraven had agreed to stay at the guild for that night, or until they knew it was safe to go back to Avlin. They hurried through the elegant streets of Maisin Rokine, which were surprisingly packed for the time of night, but the king's city never seemed to rest in the first place. Lined with tall steel poles that hung brilliant lanterns shining upon the clean cobblestone streets, the city was still lively as the night grew old, and for that, two weary adventurers were most glad. No longer would they have the feeling of someone or something lurking in the nearest shadows of a darkened alley, patiently waiting for them to fall into another trap. Though the city was much more magnificent during the day, the two friends were joyful, even making Koraven so happy that he gave thanks to the Gnomish deity Lania, the mother of kindness, as he pulled out a tiny portrait of her likeness from his bag and kissed it gently before putting it back. With a wide grin, Jaerel respected his friend's actions as he led him closer to Goluuf Wavlin. The guild was established just outside the walls, giving Jaerel and Koraven the advantage and a huge sigh of relief as they stumbled in. It was about time that Jaerel had reunited with his parents after such a long and strange journey. He wondered how much of it he could tell them. This mission was supposed to be secret, especially any details about the gem. But they were his parents, the most trustworthy people he knew, so he decided he would tell them when the time was right. Swinging open one of the enormous double doors of the guild, decorated with paints of several colors, Jaerel was immediately embraced with the long-lost comfort of home. Glancing through the hall, Jaerel noticed only one small group of what seemed like either magiles or simply a pack of travelers, sitting calmly and respectfully together in whispered conversations. The guild had the main hall filled with 4 long tables, each with tall white candles burning a pleasant aroma, and had wooden benches lined neatly beneath them. At the end of the tables was an extensive bar, serving both delectable drinks and scrumptious meals throughout the day. To the sides of the hall were 5 separate rooms, each the same size and each designated for meetings or gatherings, secret or not. The spaces between the tall, dark oak doors stood glittering, stained glass windows, shining the day and night sky brilliantly through the hall, bouncing off into the stony floor, which had one lengthy red carpet spread from the entrance doors to the bar. Torches were set upon 8 circular columns reaching to the roof. In the middle portions of the columns was where the flag of Goluuf Wavlin shone proudly. A silver snarling wolf from a side point of view, its fangs jutting ferociously forward, its ears perked back, and its eyes hungrily set as if it were ready to pounce. Jaerel would never get tired of this place. He felt right at home. Though neither Benin, Jaerel's father, nor Seelnin had any magic in them, they took after the guild with great care, along with everyone who set foot inside, no matter what background they had. They were a generous and kind couple, welcoming many who either was cast out from their families or communities, those who did not have any home at all, and, as the usual crowd that took up the bulk of the guild's members, those who desired to practice magic in a more secretive way. The steward of Maisin Rokine bade magic to be practiced in the confines of safe environments, as long as none of it would be spread into the streets among the non-magiles. When the declaration was first made into rules, many of the magiles were angered, but when the steward mentioned that it was not technically outlawed, they were content with at least having permission to study magic and aid those who did. And rightly so, several guilds were formed, though now, in the Third Age, very few were up and running, and even less those in good standing. Benin and Sionen worked day and night at the guild, though. They even had their own house established directly behind the building, so if anything happened, they would be the first to know. "What took you so long?" Sionen asked as she embraced her son warmly with tight arms. "Ben and I have been so worried these past few days." "We were, well, distracted," Jaerel said, as Sionen gave a short hug to Koraven. "Distracted?" she said, though she didn't seem surprised. "Was it a pack of wolves, or some rowdy crowd this time?" "Wolves don't go into forests much," Jaerel asked. "At least not where we are. I can tell you once you and Father are around." "My boy!" roared Benin, right on cue, coming from one of the side rooms where he had sent a trio of adventurers to bed at last. "We'd better send you with lighter boots next time to speed you up," he laughed as he squeezed Jaerel with relief. "It would have helped," Koraven admitted with a smirk, shaking Ben's hand firmly. "What are you doing here so late?" Jaerel asked, glancing at the nearly vacant hall. "You should be getting rest." A brief moment of hesitation filled the air between the parents until Benin told him, "There's been, well, rather strange folk arriving in the city recently. About 2 days ago, I'd say," he guessed as Sionen nodded. "Dark figures," she added with a shiver. "Even looking at them made me feel uneasy. Unnatural folk. Neither of us dared to approach them, and that's us I'm talking about. Some of the members here felt sort of paranoid with them around, too." Jaerel gave Koraven a painful grimace as they recalled the haunting, faceless foes who stopped at nothing to find them. If they had already found their way into Maisin Rokine, passing the guards with ease, they could have an easy time getting into the guild, the one place that they felt at peace and belonging. Jaerel could not let this happen to them, especially his parents. When he noticed Koraven's similar expression of disgust and horror, he knew his friend was thinking the same. "What is it?" Ben asked, rubbing his hands on Jaerel's shoulders. "These dark figures," Jaerel began in caution, "are following something. A priceless item of enormous power." Ben gave Sionen a very worrisome glance as he suddenly stopped the massage. "Perhaps we should wait until we are in complete secrecy," Koraven said to them all in a grim voice. "We should," Ben agreed, smiling brightly at the two friends. "You've traveled long and far. Get some rest. I'm sure the right time will come along soon." "I still have to return this horse," Jaerel told his father, beckoning outside the guild. "There should be someone here in the city who knows the stable master in Vase. His name is Helagor, and his friend is called... Oh, goodness, I've forgotten his name already." "Not to worry," Ben said confidently. "I've heard his name come up from time to time. Such a nice fellow. I'll take care of it, son. You get your rest." "Oh, and before I forget to return anything else," said Jaerel, reaching into his pocket and drawing forth a brilliant phial. "This little trinket helped us both in searching the caves, but it's not ours to keep." "Of course it is," Sionen argued. "I gave it to you for those exact reasons, so I will now demand that you keep it. I can't have my son wandering in the dark nowadays." Jaerel gave a weak smile. He wanted to tell them everything of his and Koraven's strange and dangerous escapades, but even in the comfort of the guild, there was the tiniest amount of paranoia that the Vol'dun were waiting around every corner, or through each blackened alleyway. "Hope you won't need it to get to your rooms," laughed Ben as he turned to finish the final stretch of the night shift. Jaerel thanked his father as he and Koraven strode up to the back stairs from the side of the bar, and each of them had their own room waiting for them. Though he was saddened to let go of Himmelkorn, a very trusty steed, he knew that business was business, even if a bond was formed. Jaerel wished then that the sudden strength of the gem would forever rest in Himmelkorn, that he would return to his master mightier than before, and that he might be known as the best horse in the entirety of Vase. With pleasant thoughts swimming in their heads, both Jaerel and Koraven slept soundly in a pleasant swoon for hours, until the sun was nearly at noon's position. The gem had rested firmly in Jaerel's pocket, and did not bother him or his thoughts for the longest time since its discovery. Perhaps it was the warm comfort that he and Koraven had been given that made the gem seem lesser in importance. Jaerel's parents offered to give them shelter for as long as they needed at either the guild or their house, but Jaerel felt it unsafe to stay there in Goluuf Wavlin, especially with the Vol'dun's supposedly vile appearance in the city. He did not want to drag his parents into this dangerous life. He had already dragged his best friend into it, something he did not want in the first place. Yet even as Koraven joined and risked his life, Jaerel was very much glad of his decision. Grabbing a hearty breakfast, or more like an early lunch because of the lateness of the slumber, the two groggy travelers made their way to the end of one of the long tables, which was much more scattered with various types of people than the night before. There were 3 huddled groups at the table Jaerel and Koraven sat at. One group was 3 boys hunched over bowls of steaming soup, each of them around their 20s. It seemed as if they had been there before because of their casual appearance. Another group was a party of 6 members, 2 of which looked like older parents, with the other 4 being 3 sons and 1 daughter. Occasionally they would pick at each other, only to be scolded by their mother, and rarely by the father, who laughed along with their jokes and pranking. The last group seemed curious, for they had 2 elves, both silver-haired men in loose silver garments, conversing with 2 scruffy-looking human men. They all gave wide arm gestures and pointing of fingers, but no argument broke out between them. Jaerel at first was worried about them, but once time passed by with no trouble, he turned back to his own soup, the smells wafting hungrily through his nose, and devoured it in a few minutes. Koraven had already finished his. No surprise to Jaerel. An hour before noon, Benin and Sealnan had arrived at the guild, swinging open the doors to where numerous people came rushing up to them, asking questions about quests, missions, and even what the meal schedule was like around here. Answering one at a time, they spent the next hour completely occupied with their guests until they finally came across Jaerel and Koraven, who had been sharing stories of their childhood, some of which they knew too well, and others that they had to be reminded of. Once Jaerel noticed his parents sitting next to him and Koraven, his face turned from a nostalgic, fun-filled face to a serious, grim-mannered expression. If he could trust his best friend with this secret alumnar-infused gem, he could definitely trust his own parents as well. They were taken to one of the side rooms, where the door was last firmly shut, while Jaerel's parents awaited their answer. For quite a while, Jaerel explained the beginnings of the trip, of the rare discovery and what occurred after, from the vicious duels to the constant paranoia and the cold black figures of the phantoms. Ben and Sealnan listened to every word he told them, to which they both gritted their teeth or squeezed each other's hands tightly whenever Jaerel came across an intense or frightening moment, even though the utterance of the Vol'dun's name struck fear into any mortal's heart. But once he began to introduce Jalruf and what he looked like, their faces, rather than turning to curiosity, shifted to an almost blank stare, as if they were forgetting something, or that this man had reminded them of someone else. Jaerel slowed his tale down to where Koraven gladly finished it for him. A long minute passed by once the story was over, Ben and Sealnan trying to process everything they heard, and everything their son and his friend went through. "You're sure of it?" Ben finally asked Jaerel in a whisper. "1 gem of the immortals? I mean, this is an enormous burden to carry." "It has both aided me and left me doubtful," he answered truthfully. "But I have felt its power in my grasp, and it is quite tremendous. No magi on Ordia could forge such a trinket." "And also," Koraven put in his experience, "that elven lord Siervin said that it was one of the gems himself. Tierden admitted it with him, so there's no denying it now." Instead of rejoicing at finding such a powerful and rare item, Ben and Sealnan kept giving worried faces to one another. They could not piece the words that they were feeling. Their only son was in a risky situation, but finding the rarest gem in all of history was incredible. To Jaerel's surprise, they had known about the gem for some time, as Sealnan quietly explained, but did not bother telling Jaerel about them, since he focused rather on hunting and the wildlife than being a warrior or soldier of the city. Jaerel wondered if he had knowledge of the gems earlier in his life. Perhaps he would have joined some sort of escapade or daring search of the gems, but the longer he thought of it, this random chance would never have happened, or if it did, he would have been much younger and very much frailer. "We cannot answer your heart," Sealnan said, resting her hand on Jaerel's chest. "This is no easy choice, but know that we will support your every decision." "Although it would be a very compelling story," Ben butted in with a proud voice. "To say my son is the Magi to save Ordia itself. Ha! This guild would be flooding over just to see you." Jaerel's father gave a rumbling laugh, to which his son beamed with a huge grin, giving a short chuckle. "But listen to your mother first," he continued. "You are always accepted here, and of course to the gnomes as well." He nudged Koraven, who bumped back with a friendly push. Accepted. Such was a word that Jaerel had rarely heard in this age, battling with peer pressure and the lessening diversity in Ordia, or else it seemed like a prolonged expansion to him. His face lowered to the dusty floor, gazed at the patterned tiles etched with delicacy. Resting his hand on Jaerel's shoulder, Ben grunted, "A Magiel does not hang his head low, nor does my son. This is your choice, and, if it is rightly so, your mission. We will be here, waiting for you, always." "With open arms," added Sealnan, smiling warmly at both of them, wrapping her arm around her husband. Placing his focus on his mother's eyes, Jaerel found a glimmer of hope once again. Even in the smallest of places of the world, the brightest light could outshine any darkness. This journey would be perilous, risking his family, friends, his homeland, and everything he knew, grew up with, and loved. It would become a memory, fading over months, if not years, to comfort him in the darkest days or the tightest struggles. Jaerel decided he would be taking the next few weeks as a break if Sirvin had not yet arrived to make more time and space for his decision that loomed so menacingly before him. Jaerel's parents were soon interrupted by more guests who managed to slip in accidentally, and some of the management crew of Goluuf Wavlin, who rather stumbled in, begging for help. Glad that he could talk about the biggest part of his journey so far with them, Jaerel stood up with Koraven, who was equally content, ready to return to their actual home, Avlin. Jaerel and Koraven's residence belonged in the third set of hills, or the outside hills, in the land of Avlin, or New Avlin, as some citizens of the Maisin Rokine called it. The land was very peculiar to the city folk, and that was because 3 rings of hills circled one another. Each set from the farthest outward grew smaller until one giant hill stood tall above the rest, lusciously green through the spring and summer, a golden brown during the fall, and a brilliant silver glaze through the winter. Each hill was named a farthen. The first was Farthen, the second Farthen, and the third Farthen. And the great hill that bathed in the sun and moonlight was named Brelendam. At the peaks of each hill was a simple wooden fence with gates perched along the dirt paths leading from each farthen, spreading into numerous trails to find houses built halfway into the hills, the roofs digging into the rich, thick soil, while tiny farmers or well-tended gardens took up most of their front yards, fenced in also. Some families, such as the Hillabins and Farnhams, made their whole hill their farm, producing most of the vegetables and meats in town. Naturally, though, the berries in Avlin grew the fruits, since they were the easiest to grow. 3 families named Mayberry, Goldenberry, and Echoberry were rightly named the berries of Avlin, as they were all proud of their stock, leading to a long-time rivalry between them, while the forgotten Elberry family was left out of the quarrel due to an unfortunate event some years back, regarding their strawberries being completely rotten when they had brought them to a chivalrous party. "What rotten luck they have," many of the gnomes would proclaim soon after. "Even those third hillers could have produced better berries." "Don't be discounting our like that," others would respond, "or else all our food would be fruits, and that way we wouldn't grow much at all." "All except sideways, that is," the elder gnomes would joke, and the conversation would turn to extensive stories of years past. But even among such small, quaint communities like Avlin, there was a dark past concerning their establishment set so close to Maisin Rokine. Their original home, a region originally named Avlin, was set directly west of the Zorv Lake in northern Tarash, its shores banking short cliffs of beautiful hills, much similar to the ones they now burrowed in. Yet even with such a strange location, the gnomes of Avlin lived in peace and harmony, never bothering any outsiders and accepting anyone who came in if they came with a good spirit, that is. Although looked upon with judgmental eyes, the gnomes did not let their appearance get the best of them. They were slightly shorter than most dwarves, with some to little exceptions, and grew just as wide as most of them. They covered themselves in vibrant and various shades of exuberant colors. A good deal of the men wore leather caps for the most of the day, and long suspended overalls wrapped tightly around their brown and yellow shirts underneath. The women normally wore bright dresses hung down to their ankles, their colors shimmering and dancing in the light, while their curly blonde and brown hair bounced and shifted with them. But most of all, the people of Avlin were known for their joy and happiness in the land. Their pure smiles and spiritual laughter could drive out the darkness itself, as Jaerel believed. Their parties were bursting with the genuine comfort of fellowship, while the air about them was filled with the commotion of shouts, yelping, laughing, and drinking. For some time the gnomes had no particular name or title save the Gnomes of Avlin, and no such darkness or evil had passed through their glorious hills and homes until Zarlan, the horrible tyrant of the Second Age, began his first invasion of Ordia. Having no mercy on any free folk of the world, the Dark Lord ordered Avlin either to be loyal to his rule or to perish in misery. The gnomes, being frightened out of their minds, fled for their lives without declaring a decision, but before they could reach the Caerel Cross, the corner boundary of Selmoria, Torash, Threlonk, and Zephythia, most of the peaceful folk there were slaughtered and left to die in the open fields, being proclaimed enemies of the true Lord, and they were called traitors and deserters among Zarlan's followers. Such innocent people, left to the mercy of unsavory orcs and evil servants, commanded by a heartless sorcerer. The few who escaped, around 100 in number, had desperately trudged their way to Maisin Rokine, knowing that King Intishim, the mighty elven ruler at the time, was very merciful. They came to him on bended knees, asking for a simple piece of land to rebuild their community, and upon hearing their tragedy, the king mourned for and with them, granting them more than they desired. He named them in his elven tongue then as Hugelmen, meaning the ground people, and the beaten community of gnomes accepted it with humble hearts. As time went by, the gnomes recovered their past lives with the new home, expanding their people's lineage as each year passed until an official mayor was elected, and the village of New Avlin was successfully established. They were a bustling town to be a part of, full of hearty laughs, fruitful labors, countless celebrations of delightful music, disorganized dancing, and, of course, plenty of beer and ale to fill the hills with joy. Intishim grew rather fond of these folk, visiting them often in his spare time, giving them aid as much as he could. One day, King Intishim noticed these people fancied the earth above all else, digging into the hills, making huts of wood and bricks. Since then, he gave the people whatever resources they need to construct well-made homes, so that no more cave-ins, which were quite often, occurred. Over time, once Intishim's rule was over and a new king was put in place, the gnomes remained in peace and quiet until Jaerel and Koraven's arrival. As usual, Koraven took to exploring places that normally shouldn't be explored when he had been living in the streets of Maisin Rokine, and one day decided to creep into the gnomes' town, startling many of them, but was not bothered by his presence. After several visits to Avlin, Koraven urged Jaerel to come with him. Before long, the duo seemed to be part of the people, sharing stories, joining parties, and becoming close friends with many of the youthful population. Eventually, with the people's approval, Jaerel and Koraven became the first non-gnomish citizens of New Avlin, even if Koraven had a bit of gnomish blood already in him. With such a grand event, the mayor, Arbin Snowburn, declared that every year a celebration was to be held in memory of their fallen people, but also in their new way of life, still able to be known far and wide as the happiest race in all of Ordia. It had been 9 years since the first party, held annually on the last weekend of Sepultembrin, renamed September many years in the future, and this year, being the 10th celebration, was bound to be a memorable one. "Do you think Kaladel will come?" Koraven asked excitedly as he and Jaerel set on the road south to Avlin with ease. "I hear his magic tricks are incredible. Of all the years he could have picked to visit was the one I wasn't at." Kaladel, even among the gnomes, was a much expected visitor around these parts. For many years, the wizard stopped by during the festival to perform extraordinary magic, or to bring supplies from the city and share interesting news from around the earth. He loved the gnomish community, giving him a sense of relief and peace that the flame of joyous contentment inside the gnomes would never leave their hearts. The little people noticed this in the wizard as he continued his visits much more than once a year, and accepted him gladly, just as much as Jaerel and Koraven. Jaerel, along with Koraven, wished very much that Kaladel would come this year, especially after so many unusual and perilous events. But being a wizard in Ordia was no simple task, as he reminded Jaerel time after time. Nevertheless, Kaladel had a close connection with the half-breed, remembering every moment that they had spent together. Even in vile times such as these, the fellowship was of great importance. As Jaerel thought about the wizard and returning to the festival again, he just realized the party was almost a month away, giving Kaladel time to return after all, with little hurry. "I'm sure he will, Corey," Jaerel answered, but not for the reason of the party, the half-breed thought, his mind swaying to the gem's presence. "I wonder what stews they'll make this year," wondered Koraven aloud, shifting his thoughts to daydreaming about every flavored soup, stew, or brew he could imagine. The one thing that gnomes took great pride in was their delectable recipes of anything food-related, from meats to salads to soups. "Whatever they bring," Jaerel comforted his friend, "it'll be the best thing they've had in years, even better than the third year." Both Jaerel and Koraven reached back to their memories of the third annual festival, where the competition was practically all the families present. For the rest of the gnomes, it was rather those who could fill their bellies up the fastest, or who could drink the most ale. Among the constant feuds, there was more laughter, which overpowered everything, or so it seemed, and they would all love to keep it that way. "I bet all of Avlin will be there," continued Koraven as the duo was halfway to the hills after a couple hours of walking at a steady pace. "Just imagine Halag's face when we show up. He's going to be so happy." "Yeah, and probably more muscular, too," Jaerel joked, making Koraven laugh in agreement, posing as if they were Halag, flexing his arms in a proud manner. It'll be nice being home again, admitted Koraven with a warm smile, contagious to Jaerel, who did the same. Coming at last to the front gates of Avlin by evening, Jaerel noticed 2 guards standing firmly before a set of large double doors carved with intricate, curled designs from top to bottom. Each door had a small peeping hole right above a circular metal ring, which served as the handle, and below the ring was a thin slot for a keyhole. The wall around Avlin was rather thin, being made of thick, flat boards nailed one against the other, stretching around the entirety of the Farthen Hills. There were 4 archways total in each direction, with the same design and security. To the Gnomish community there were no threats or grudges against them, save for the meanness of the dwarves, but even with that bitter feud, Avlin's defenses were little. They would not need to watch their walls nearly as much as Maisin Rokine. Approaching the guards, Koraven recognized one of them as Timrand, a young man around his mid-20s who loved exploring and adventuring almost as much as Koraven. He had curly blonde hair and was among the tallest of the gnomes, and rather than calling him by his full name, the gnomes nicknamed him Timmy. He had a freckled face and a pudgy nose, and when he was thrilled or angered, his nostrils tended to flare open, causing all his friends to laugh uncontrollably. "Corey, is that you?" shouted Timmy with excitement, dropping his spear to hug his friend tightly. "It's been a while, and Jaerel too?" The half-breed embraced him quickly. "Off hunting again, I guess, huh?" Timmy guessed. "As usual," Koraven answered for Jaerel too. "We didn't get much this time, though, but I'm sure with a few drinks we'll forget about it." "I'll see you there, then," Timmy laughed in agreement. "Our post ends in a few hours. Pretty silent night, so maybe they'll let us out early." "Let's make sure it stays that way, then," Jaerel said with a smile. "We will. There's nothing to report." Jaerel took that as good tidings, realizing the gnomes had not yet seen or heard about the Voldoon, even if, in Maisin Rokine, it was already spoken of. Maybe, Jaerel thought, the city was going to keep the phantom's visit quiet so as not to startle the little folk. He couldn't tell if that was a good thing or not, but once the doors creaked open to reveal their long-awaited homeland, the rush of comfort swelled inside him. The smell of fresh soil mixed with the healthy, growing crops made Jaerel and Koraven feel at home. Following the first trail leading to the right, they bounded up and down 4 of the smaller hills until at last they came across their quiet, humble abode. Their hill's steepest side was 10 feet high, where the front of their half-burrowed house was made, including a flat wooden roof built at a slight angle from the top of the 2 stone columns supporting it. Beneath the roof was a flat stone surface leading to a single oak door, where the curved handle was made of silver, and above it was a tiny triangular window gleaming with the last sunlight of the day. To each side of the door there were 10 layers of stacked stones before it transitioned into a thick wooden portion where it stood above the slanted roof and dug into the top of the hill. 10 feet to the left and right of the door, the foundation cornered to another 10 feet until it also dug deep into the soil. Tall, slender glass windows were carved in the wooden section at the front, giving plenty of light to the vacant home. Shuffling through his stuffed pockets, Koraven took out a small golden key, inserting it into the keyhole just below the curved handle, and the door creaked open. A flutter of dust puffed into the air as the gnome and half-breed entered their home at last, after so many weeks of distant travels, digging into caves, and being chased by violent phantoms. Koraven glanced at Jaerel quickly to light the candles, who muttered, "Alafuma," and a brief, tiny flame danced from his palms to the nearest candlestick, resting on their small circular table, which was vacant, and where Koraven heaved his heavy pack, almost toppling the candle over and spilling half of his herbs and plants he collected in the mysterious forest. Jaerel set his bag near the door, latching it shut, and directing more of the flame to the candles set widely across their home. The warmth and comfort they had been desiring flowed into them like a huge embrace of loving care. The table in front of them was set directly in the center of the main room, which served as both the living and dining room of their home. A green door was behind the table, and to the left and right of the room, the doors were a deep blue. A dull gray carpeted mat was set underneath the table also, lying flat on a cold stony floor, though it was smooth to the touch. Through the right door was Jaerel's bedroom, and to the left was Koraven's. Behind the green door was the kitchen, probably still crammed full of whatever provisions were needed once the duo came back. Jaerel went through the first green door, where Koraven's list of eating times was stuck on the wall. There were 5 lines total, each representing the mealtime: breakfast, snacks, lunch, tea time, and supper. Jaerel laughed as he had somehow forgotten all about Koraven's strange patterns, but noticed another note was stuck below it with neat handwriting, reading, "Jaerel, you left the meat out, and it began to stink very bad. I've swapped it with some fresh ones. so you may have a full stomach the morning you come back. It's from that kind man, Arden, who lives a few burrows down. Also in the cupboard there are 2 loaves of bread. P.S. Try telling Koraven to clean his room before your journeys. With the greatest love, Sealnan and Ben. Even in his absence, Jaerel's parents looked after him and his best friend. He felt a huge smile spread across his face as he went through the door to find exactly what the note had said. Strangely, Jaerel saw 10 circular patties of meat sitting on a top shelf, but when he went up to touch them, they were freezing, and he guessed that Sealnan or Ben had a Magi set a coldness spell on them, so they wouldn't get as spoiled as the last ones. Turning to his right, he opened the wall cupboard to find all the plates, bowls, and silverware to be neatly organized, and right above them 2 fresh golden loaves of bread. They looked very delectable to Jaerel, and he wished he could snatch one up for himself, but knowing he and Koraven had little coin after this peculiar adventure, he held himself back and turned back to his room. A neat bed greeted him once he entered. A bundle of blankets was folded together, and a lovely feather pillow laid at the head. To the left were a reading desk and a large oak dresser. Though he didn't have much, he preferred to be outside, with the gnomes, with his parents and various Magis at Goluuf Wavlin, and especially out with nature. With a long draw in, Jaerel breathed the first breath of relief he had had in so many weeks. "I'm turning in, Jaerel." Koraven's voice almost startled him as he saw the gnome's head around the doorframe, his eyes drooping and his mouth yawning. "See you in the morning." "Get some rest," Jaerel said with a grin. "You've earned it." Koraven slipped away, and in a matter of minutes, Jaerel could hear him snore away in absolute comfort and happiness. But once Jaerel knew that he was alone, he closed his door quietly and took out the gem from his pocket with his glove this time. No result of the swooshing swarm of energy he normally felt. He did not want the surge to flow through him tonight, though, since he wanted to sleep almost as much as Koraven. With great caution, he set the gem down on his dresser, having only one single candle lit, but the gem emitted more light than the flame itself. Reaching out to place it elsewhere, Jaerel caught himself staring at the stone in a wondrous, awe-filled stance. His arm was still outstretched, but unmoving. The curious murky cloud in the center of the perfect sparkling blue stone waved back and forth like an oceanic current, never ceasing, but never speeding up. His vision shifted now to the blue substance, and he could have sworn that tiny, minuscule silver specks flickered and faded in seconds, all throughout the interior of the gem. He wanted more than anything to peek inside the gem, wondering if it was a liquid, or if it was an enchantment, or spell. Then he felt the pull of its power. An unknown courage of spectacular strength seemed to waft through the space between the gem and Jaerel, linking them in a tight bond. Jaerel wished he had a sword at his side so he could charge the Vol'dun right then and there with his power, but suddenly he found where he was in reality. The lure of its beauty and the pulling of its strange power captured Jaerel's heart until he found his face inches from its smooth surface. It was too late, though. He had barely touched the gem with his fingertips, but something odd happened. A spark of white and black specks flew from the gem, and to Jaerel's astonishment, a tiny crack formed on the right edge of the gem. With a brief yelp escaping his lips, Jaerel cupped the gem as if it were an infant, glaring intently at the crack. No form or sight of the silver-infused blue substance seemed to leak out. In a few long, painful minutes, Jaerel set the gem inside one of the dresser's bottom drawers, and once it was out of sight, the sleepiness in Jaerel's body hit at once. The moment he hit the pillow and drew the first layer of blankets over him, he was fast asleep until the morning sun broke through the only window of his room. Jumping to his feet, Jaerel felt the sudden urge to check on the gem, but he hesitated once his hand gripped the edge of the drawer. He thought to himself, how could the enemy know the gem was stuffed inside a drawer in a gnomish village? It was a rather curious thought for him, thinking of black figures bursting through the open door, their black cloaks billowing with an unforeseen wind, moving without effort into Jaerel's room, removing the gem, and becoming more terrible than before, wielding the power of an immortal. Snapping back to his senses, Jaerel saw the drawer open widely in front of him, his hand hovering over the stone, shaking and trembling as if it were being held forcefully back. Taking his other hand, he snatched it away from the gem with a great effort, ignoring the tempting sense of greatness it had so easily lured him last night. Shoving the drawer back into its place, Jaerel got dressed as best he could with his head dizzy until he slid the door open to the vacant dining room, where Koraven's pack was still hunched over messily. Once he shut the door behind him, Jaerel felt a sudden easiness and relief come about him again, just as he felt when he and Koraven returned last night. Turning to the kitchen again, he split one of the loaves with several pieces with a quick slicing spell, as he normally used it while making food. Taking a slice out of one of the meat patties, he placed it in between two 2 pieces of bread, and in another flash of bright magic, the sandwich became toasted. With great delight, Jaerel devoured it, smacking his lips until every crumb was settled in his stomach. Taking a few quick gulps of fresh, clear water, he peeked into Koraven's room, where the gnome was still fast asleep. With a slight grin, Jaerel set out to venture into the first set of hill regions of Avlin, Trell Farthen. Already the sun was heating the high mounds with a warm glow, greeting Jaerel with a friendly, nostalgic feel, even if it had only been a couple months. Something about the sensation of Avlin made Jaerel want to leap for joy and prance through the soft fields, and trod down the flattened trails that had made Avlin his home. Before he could set foot out of his and Koraven's house, though, he almost jumped at the sound of a booming voice, yelling, "Jaerel, that can't be you!" The half-breed turned to his left to see another very close friend of his, Halag Hillabin. "Hal!" shouted back Jaerel as the gnome came hustling over to him with open arms. And once they gave a friendly hug, Jaerel asked, "How's it been here? Did I miss anything important?" Halag was one of the tallest gnomes in all of Avlin, being close to 4 foot 7 inches, of which he was most proud, and in any competition or argument he would bring it up right away. He had dirty blonde hair that curled at every strand, and rough cheekbones that showed the start of a beard that he made a goal to grow out by the end of the year. His bright blue eyes were highly noticeable, and he wore either yellow or light brown shirts tucked into long brown pants strapped with black overalls. Just as Jaerel and Koraven had imitated before, Halag also was quite muscular for a gnome, as he worked hard in the field all day, and at home he worked even harder on himself. Among the people of Avlin, especially in Trell Farthen, he was of great help and loved the children, even the ones who snuck about and were mischievous. Halag's family, the Hillabins, was almost entirely made of farmers, save for a couple of cousins who followed the butchery route. Halag had a small potato farm planted right above his house, fenced in neatly and plowed to perfection. Admittedly, Jaerel thought of his potatoes as some of the best he'd ever tasted. Since he was close friends with Halag, he got them at a slight discount when no one was watching or listening. He and a few other friends were the first to greet the half-breed and Koraven when they first ventured into the Gnomish lands, and since then there had been a close bond of friendship between all of them. "Well," grunted Halag, "I'm not sure about important things, but there have been some weird rumors recently." Jarrell's face instantly went solemn. "Yep, been the latest talk," Halag said, leaning in close, lowering his voice so that Jaerel could hardly hear him. "Apparently, some of the Elberries chillin', the gnome's way of saying children, were sneaking around the maize plantation just last week. Everyone knows that the Elfam is trying to get back into competition, but I couldn't see him pull that against the maize." At the sound of the local news, rather than hearing about dark figures from the outside world, Jaerel gave a sigh of relief. "Them kids didn't confess to doing it," continued Halag, "but Margle's kids ain't that hard to spot. Bright as hair are an Earl for sure." "Still causing trouble then," Jaerel went along with Halag's secret news. "I wouldn't want to be tangled with all that ruckus." "Aye, none of us Third Hillers do," Halag laughed as he squinted at Jaerel's windows. "Is Corey still sleeping?" "With everything we've been through," Jaerel began to say, but caught himself. I mean, well, it's been a long trip." Halag gave a curious glance to Jaerel. "We didn't get the elk, but I saw it with my own eyes and found its weakness. But before you go asking for it and ask Koraven for it, I won't spill my secret." "You never do change, do ya?" Suddenly, from a distance, a loud call of a bird startled the two out of their conversation. Peering above, Jaerel noticed a black raven come swooping in, not because it spotted its first meal of the day, but to swiftly and precisely perch upon Halag's open arm, which he had extended naturally. This raven's feathers were not only black, but at just the right angle there was a silver glint. A curious gaze was caught in its eyes, and its beak was larger than most. Around its neck was a slender collar, blending into the feathers, and dangling from it was a small scroll tied tightly and neatly. Halag loosened the paper from the collar, and after glancing it over in a matter of seconds, pulled out a feather of his own, of which the tip was colored in a red substance. With elegance, Halag wrote on the backside in a hurried fashion, and after signing it, he whispered something to the raven, and it took off almost at once with a loud caw. "Curious that it has lasted this long," Jaerel laughed as the speck of black feathers disappeared into the sky. "And more curious that you have no magic yet." "I'm not quite like you, Jaerel," smirked Halag. "If my bird could teach me a majillion ways, I'm sure it would not be with me by now. And you'd be off working 3 fields rather than 1. Well, now that you mention it, I'd better be off. Got some trading in the second hill, Halag grunted as he picked up a hefty bag of golden potatoes. I'll see you around. Tell Corey I said hello too. The gnome huddled off then, wobbling to one side as the potatoes seemed to weigh him down. Jaerel watched him go up and over the hill, and once he was certain his friend could handle the bag, he turned away to follow a roughly carved trail around the front of his house to the top of the mound. As he reached the pinnacle, he took in a deep breath to inhale the fresh air and the bright, vibrant environment. He could see patches of gold scattered across green fields, signifying the tough, long work of the gnomes, which was their pride and joy, exactly how their people were in the Second Age. The billowing clouds sent shattered rays of piercing light through Avlin's curves and bumps, littered with numerous bodies in the gnomish community hustling about their everyday lives. The farthings of Avlin were each set up very similar to the next. Each range of hills overlooked an expanse of flat fields, either filled with fields of bountiful crops or bunches of vendors' tents and huts. At least Trellfarthen was mostly crops, while the second hill, Uralfarthen, centered around raising animals, forging tools, and at times, creating weapons. The first hillers, Arfarthens, were very stuck up and prideful, as they were among the richest and oldest of the gnomes. They formed the councils, committees, and important groups of Avlin, deciding on rules, adjustments, and the overall layout of the gnomish community. None of the first hillers liked the third hillers, and the feeling was mutual. The citizens of Uralfarthen, however, were stuck in a neutral spot, not taking sides and not bothering to get in the way. Jaerel sat down in peace on the soft green grass as the wind sifted through his hair, giving him another sense of comfort. He wondered if he meditated long enough and sharpened his focus, he'd be able to control his longing for the gem to be in his grasp and, if possible, able to form the magic within the stone to his will. For quite some time Jaerel sat still as he absorbed the heat of the sun, felt the coolness of the wind and the graceful movement of the grass. To be a true, meaningful magi was to be connected with nature, as if it were one with the magician, to flow and harness its energy to be used in whatever way the magi chose. But with the gem constantly in his mind, Jaerel found it more difficult to focus, allowing the simple sounds of shouting or the scampering of small critters to set his senses on edge. An hour passed until he heard Koraven swing open the door, groaning as he stretched his sore arms from side to side. "Wonder where he went to," muttered Koraven, but after a minute of waiting, he sat at a wooden chair just outside the door and pulled out a long pipe. Jaerel did not join his friend for another half hour, and when he bolted around the hill, he gave Koraven such a shock he almost dropped his pipe and nearly fell out of his chair. "You just missed Hal," Jaerel informed him once Koraven began smoking again. Already he was piping up a familiar smell of Hornbell's weed. "I expect he'll return later, looking for you." "Oh, I can't wait," said Koraven excitedly. "I've got some herbs that I need help with, and he's just the right gnome to go to." "Going to cook something up for the festival this time?" "Nah, not this year, no. Haven't got the time anyway. Until we've got our name out in a good manner, we'll wait for our opportunity of fame. But just you wait. It'll be the best pie in Avlin for years to come." Koraven had worked very hard to create the best pie in all the land for almost 2 years now, each resulting in Koraven shaking his head, thinking there was some secret ingredient. He and Halag collected herbs and bought spices to mix and match numerous recipes, but even to Halag it wasn't enough. Jaerel hadn't learned much about cooking when he left Maisin Rokine for Avlin, but it didn't bother him either. He was glad he had his closest friend so knowledgeable in cooking, and although he didn't admit it, he sometimes took it for granted. "I suppose the berries are already thinking ahead then," Jaerel said, gazing out to the fields as if he expected the competitive families to be sneaking about. "You think they'll turn up around here?" Koraven snuffed. "It'd be a shocker if they show their faces, even in Url. The one thing I don't look forward to in the festival." Jaerel nodded in agreement as Koraven raised his pipe to offer a quick puff, but he declined. "One of these days, I'll get you to try it," said Koraven with a smirk. And that is the end of Chapter 5. So, yeah, we're actually in the part of the story that it's, just as the title suggests, it's a breath of relief. Jaerel and Koraven are kind of back home where they feel the most comforted. And I realized after reading this that I said the word comfort quite a bit, so it's a good thing that I'm actually rereading this because as I'm writing the second book, I'm trying not to repeat a lot of the same words in a chapter. So, but yeah, this is actually the kind of more lore building, as I've said before, that each chapter, I wouldn't say every chapter, but most chapters in the first book and through all of them we'll have like snippets of history kind of building. So then that way like the lore builds. So, like this one was kind of the backstory of Avlin, which was pretty much like the gnomes' downfall in the Second Age, and then the escaped gnomes pretty much went all the way up to Maisin Rokine, very, very far away. If you ever check out the map that I have. I don't know if I have that posted anywhere. Maybe I should. But yeah, they fled to Maisin Rokine, and that's where King Intishim, who was a very mighty figure in Ordian past, which he is actually included in my History of Ordia playlist. So if you ever want to go back and see who King Intishim was, I definitely have like a little brief snippet of what Intishim did. But yeah, it's kind of like the history of the gnomes, and then this next chapter is kind of like more of their like traditions. So yeah, it's a nice like couple chapters before they get back into more danger and more journeys. And I thought it would be a cool little thing to just show you guys like a little corner of Ordia that's very peaceful and calming in what Jaerel and Koraven call home. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that little bit of history and how Jaerel's parents basically, I would say like they own the guild of Goluuf Wavlin. It's a very it's a citywide welcomed guild, so it's very cool, and it's also because his parents don't have any magic, like they can't perform magic because it's not in their blood. So it just kind of like goes to show their generosity. So a lot of character development, like you'll see that along the book. You get stacked more and more. So, but that's kind of like the point of the book, right? Especially fantasy. So yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed this chapter of Lands of Ordia. There are 25 chapters, if I believe so. So it's going to be a long time until we actually finish the book. So there is plenty more to come. A lot more adventures and peril in, I would say, well, maybe not the near future, but pretty soon once they set out again back into Ordia. So hopefully you guys enjoy that too, because I'm excited to read the rest of my book for pretty much the remainder of the year. So it's a big book. It's 600 pages, so it takes a while. So with all that rambling and extra thoughts and stuff and reading out of the way, just stay tuned for another episode of the Lands of Ordia, and thanks again for listening.